Over the weekend, I've had a number, of conversations about like advanced statistics and how they're just so stupid and why old school versus new school. And so I figured, you know what? Let's have a conversation about advanced statistics. Let's talk about why we use things like weighted runs created or weighted on base average or FIP as opposed to something like ERA or RBIs. And I want to start by saying I grew up an old school baseball purist. And there's still a lot of me that is a baseball purist in a lot of ways. I like when guys pimp home runs at this point. Like, I love the personality, but I'm also for throwing inside. And if they're going to pimp a home run, then they better be ready to turn the shoulder. I have no issues with old school. In fact, I love when, the game is played in that way with, unwritten rules, things of that nature. But when I started looking into advanced stats and looked at the way in which advanced stats can help you understand the game even more, then there's no reason to just discount them. Do launch angle matter? Yes, they do. Does exit velocity off a bat matter? Yeah, it does. Does average tell us the type of hitter that someone is? No, it really doesn't. But what needs to be said in all of these situations is just relying on one specific piece of data is missing the entire context. Like everything in life, baseball statistics have to be done in a sense of contextual analysis. Use average as a starting point, but also combine that with their ability to create runs in a weighted runs created plus, or use it in conjunction with a weighted on base average. And so I want to talk about a few of these things, some that I like the most as far as advanced statistics go, and then we'll get into the preview and the recap and my final thoughts on the Tigers veterans. So let's talk about things. For decades, average and RBIs were a huge measure of the type of hitter that somebody is and the value that they brought. And in fact, back, during the Hank Greenberg days of Detroit Tigers baseball, he was more concerned about RBIs than he was even home runs, even in the year that he was challenging Babe Ruth's 60 home run record. RBIs are important because they're a team stat, but they are only a stat of opportunity. To measure a hitter's greatness based on their ability to drive in runs is missing context, because if it were not for the team aspect of it, then there's no stat to be had. There's strictly a stat of opportunity. The same is true about pitcher wins. Now, pitcher wins, as far as looking at, this guy's a 20-game winner. Well, yeah, great. He pitched, well enough to win, but what is missing from that context is the fact that his team actually played well enough to win. If a pitcher goes out and throws 6 innings and gives up 5 runs, but his team scored 6, did he pitch great? No. Not necessarily, but he still got the win. And so there's different ways to look at the game of baseball and to look at more predictive type stats and more actual player specific to tell you a profile of how these players will actually be on a baseball field. That's why I use specific measurements when I look at different ways to analyze the game. On base plus slugging is a huge one. On base plus slugging is going to tell us how well they get on base, but also the way in which they drive the ball. It's also used in conjunction with a metric that is called ISO, where ISO accounts for the pure power that a hitter hits with. So a batter that goes 1 for 5 in a game will have an average of 200, but their ISO will be a little bit higher because a double weighs more than, say, a single. Those are important numbers to have. They kind of drill down and help us dig into the type of players that they are. Weighted on base average is actually probably one of the best offensive statistics. It's WOBA, and it accounts for each individual way that a player reaches base. And it's weighted appropriately, so a home run is worth more than a walk. And that's important because as far as run scoring goes, which is the impetus to baseball, is scoring more runs than the opponent, you need to know how a player's at-bat impacts run scoring. Now let's talk about pitching for a second. Let's talk about ERA. We talk about ERA, and quality starts may be the worst stat that was ever invented because a guy can go 6 innings, give up 3 or less runs, and it's considered a quality start. But if a guy goes only 6 innings and gives up 3 runs, that's a 4.50 ERA, and we would not consider that great. So we introduce statistics like FIP, which is fielding independent pitching, which takes the balls in play out of the equation and reads like an ERA, so it's truly a pitcher-focused statistic. How effective is that pitcher? If a pitcher has an ERA of like 2.50, but his FIP is like 4.50, that tells you that guy's gotten a lot of help in the field from the fielders that have been putting balls in play and making outs. So I get the hesitation when it comes to looking at advanced stats and going, oh, it's ruining the game of baseball, and oh, nerds are taking over, and da-da-da-da-da. Like, I get all of that. But if you step back for a second and you maybe open the mind a little bit to look at these advanced stats, they can actually tell you a lot more detail than what simply an average or an RBI or an ERA or pitching win can tell you, and honestly can help you to maybe even enjoy the game more. I'll give you a for instance. Always, it seemed when a guy was on second base with nobody out, the old school way of thinking was bunt him over to third. However, run expectancy with a guy on third and 1 out is actually statistically less than a guy on second, nobody out. Does that change your strategy and the way that you look at the game of baseball? It does for me. Bunting may have its place, but it is not necessarily statistically relevant to bunt. And I think that that's important, and I think that if we step back and we look at the way that that game can be played, driven by analytics, is actually more fun and can actually see the way that the game is evolving, and it can create better conversations among fans from the old school, which, again, I played on a team, and I'm not pumping my record up, but like I literally played on a small ball team during travel ball. The guy on first, you bunt him to second, you bunt him to third, you get him in. Like, that is how we played, and, it's a way to play, but moving forward, it is not the way the teams are going to go about playing, especially based on run expectancy and things of that nature. So let's embrace the analytics. Don't lose the old school. Throw inside if a guy pimps a home run. There's nothing wrong with that. The unwritten rules can still exist, but we can still analyze and look at our teams in a different way based on these statistics. And it's something that I've embraced over the last few years, and I think that it is something that is fantastic for someone who wants to understand the game just a little bit more. If you just want to enjoy the entertainment of it, sure, don't embrace it. But if you really want to understand the strategy and you really want to understand player profiles and things of that nature and how this player can impact your team, then embrace the advanced statistics. That's enough nerding out.
Man on a mission, I'ma get it. You know I be on a what?